Good morning, everybody. Welcome to your morning encouragement on the 8th. Today in your reading, we are diving into one of my all-time favorite Psalms, Psalms 27. And there's so much happening in this passage that I want to share with you today, that I want us to talk about and kind of dive into. But I want to start by asking one question, a really, really important question. And that is this. If you could ask God for just one thing for yourself, what would it be? Go ahead and think of it. If you could ask God for one thing just for yourself, what would it be? Maybe it would be winning the lottery. Maybe you'd be finding that special someone. Maybe it would be, problems at your work or in your neighborhood or with your family being washed away. But I wonder if you would answer the same way that David answers in Psalm 27. I want to look at just one verse in this psalm that I think has incredible impact for our life. And it's Psalm 27 in verse 4. And David says this. He sort of summarized everything in his life, all the desires of his heart, into this one thing that he would ask. He says, "One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek," or "this only do I desire, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple." I wonder how many of us answered like that. I wonder how many of us seek one thing from God if we would seek the same thing that David says here in Psalm 27, verse 4. The truth is, what we desire shapes so much of our life. What we desire shapes so much of our life. At the beginning of this psalm, you see David is once again in peril, but he's claiming his desire, and not just his desire, but his conviction that he will not be fearful, even though the odds are stacked against him. And the reason for that, as he shows us in verse 4 here, is that his desires are different than maybe what we would anticipate. I think many of us might desire freedom from our foes. I think many of us might desire comfort. But David desires something greater, something deeper, something more solid, something unshakable. David's desires are ordered differently than many of ours are, I think. And it's that reordered desire, putting the desire first and foremost on who God is, not just what God can do for us, that gives David courage, that gives David steadfastness, that gives David a conviction in the midst of the storm of life that is unshakable. Because our circumstances are going to change, and David's circumstances certainly changed all throughout his life. But his desires, his properly ordered desires, didn't change. And it was that desire, that properly ordered desire of seeking God, the gift giver, not just the gifts that he can give us, that gives David this strength when things don't go his way. See, I think so often in our faith, we can fall into this trap of seeking what God can give us. We seek his gifts. We seek his blessing. We seek his provision. We seek his favor. And of course, there's nothing wrong with seeking any or all of those things. In fact, we ought to seek those things. But when those things become our ultimate desire over and above our desire for God as who he is, we run the risk of losing everything. We may not be aware of it, but we're standing on uneasy ground. We're standing on a foundation that could be washed away with a strong storm. We're standing in a house that could be blown over in a strong wind. You see, it's only God and God himself that is unchanging. And the good news for us is that it's God and God himself that is to be our ultimate desire, but is also the ultimate good and the ultimate beauty. As you study the scriptures and you see who God is, how he relates to his people, how he loves his people, what his kingdom, what his world is meant to look like, you begin to have your imagination captured by this unbelievably loving God. with this unbelievable, beautiful love and picture for how we are to be and how we're to relate to him and how we're to relate with one another. And what ends up happening is you fall in love with that God, and it becomes your ultimate desire. And when he becomes our ultimate desire, and not just what he can give us, we find that our faith is built on an unshakable rock foundation that will give us hope, that will give us courage, that will give us strength and conviction regardless of what is going around us. A strength and a conviction, just like we see here with David. In the first Great Awakening, there was a pastor, leader, writer, a man named Jonathan Edwards, who wrote that there was a clear divide being seen between those who were claiming to be Jesus followers and those who actually were. And what he observed that difference to be were that some were seeking God merely because they saw him as useful, merely because they saw him as being the source of some kind of blessing in their life. And there were others who sought God because they desired him as beautiful, just like David describes in Psalm 27:4. So my question for you today is, if you could ask God for one thing, what would it be? If it's not more of God, what can you do today to remind yourself of his beauty, to remind yourself of his goodness, to remind yourself that he and he alone is the ultimate good of life? And when our desire is set on him, we can have unshakable faith. Jesus reiterates this later in the New Testament in Matthew chapter 6. He says, "Seek first the kingdom of God. And all these other things, all these things that you worry about, all these things that you seek, all these things that you chase after with all of your life, your energy, and your passion, all of these things will be given to you as well." But it starts by having properly ordered desire for God and for God alone. So order your desires today. Set aside some time to pray and to ask God to reshape your heart, to reorder your desires so that your life, your faith could be built on this foundation, the foundation that David's faith was built on and the foundation that Jesus was built on.